Order. Questions to the... Prime Minister, Kerry McCarthy.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Can you hear me now? Press 1, please. Oh my fucking god. It was working fine and then I press start streaming and it doesn't work. Are you kidding me? Everything was fine until I literally pressed one button. Are you kidding me? I talked for like a minute and nothing. Oh my life. Kill me now. Oh, 2020 is going to be so good. Okay. Refresher from what I already said. I'm going to have to put a timestamp in the comments after this stream starts at. So there's always one person who does that anyway, so that's great. The topics for this particular PMQs are obesity, which is the very first question, and I kind of want to touch on it. The second will be the NHS, because, yeah, why not? The third will be something rather hilarious, and it'll be the last question Corbyn asks that will lead to the Prime Minister saying something that is really fucking funny that I have a video for. Where the Shadow Chancellor wants to overthrow capitalism. Now, I was going to make a video on that. I was going to make a video on that as a subject. Okay, Native, I'm not speaking any louder than this. The volume setting is as loud as I can make it. You're going to have to put your ears right up to the microphone. To the earphone, sorry. And when you're there, press 1, and then I'll scream into the microphone for you, just so you know you can hear me properly. In any case, those are the topics. There was something else. What was it? Oh yes, right at the beginning of PMQs, they're going to talk about Grenfell and Manchester. Grenfell was a bunch of tower blocks went up in smoke because of combustible cladding on the outside. Now, it's been a year, and an investigation has finally started. There was a report by Judith Hackett, which I have linked in the description, which indicated certain failings, but also didn't highlight certain things that should be recommended to be banned, like combustible cladding. That will, of course, also be mentioned in BMQs. Along with the Manchester bombings of that Latina Tart concert, whatever her name was, I can't remember. Doesn't matter. Latina Tart, let's call her that. Sounds like a great pop name. Maybe a band name. There's some virtue signaling that accompanies it, and I want to touch on that because I don't agree with the conclusion of one of these little virtuous moments. You didn't miss anything. Mic was muted. It wasn't muted. I went into OBS settings and it was disabled, even though on the main OBS Studio page it was showing as working. So there was obviously a bug there. I will check for updates once I have finished here. Right, that's all done. I'm going to now just dive right into this shit. Oh, is it not playing now? What is wrong on my screen? Give me a second. I've just got to faff. Alright, no, it is working, that's fine. Okay, so because I can't keep an eye on the chat, I have to have it on a different device, so yeah. 7 years, yeah. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, this week has seen the start of the Grenfell Tower inquiry. This was an unimaginable tragedy, and justice must be done for the victims, survivors, bereaved, and the wider community. It is right that we learn everything we can about what happened and take the necessary steps to make sure that nothing like it ever happens again. Mr. Speaker, yesterday also allowed the nation to come together 1 year on to remember all the victims of the Manchester terrorist attack.
It is truly tragic that these things happen. The bombing thing especially. People talk about their lessons to be learned and how we will defeat these things. And as Corbyn hasn't said what I'm waiting for him to say on it, I'm not going to draw on this too much. But there's an obvious thing we don't talk about that we should talk about, because it would really help. Just saying.
That night saw the worst of humanity, but it also saw the best. The kindness, compassion, and fortitude we witnessed that night triumphed, and the great spirit of Manchester continues to inspire us. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Kerry McCarthy.
I would echo the condolences expressed by the Prime Minister to the victims, friends and families of both Grenfell and the Manchester bombing. And on a happier note, congratulations from this side of the House to the royal couple. I think even the fully paid up cynics amongst us found it quite charming.
That's a lie.
And I'm very much one of them.
No, you're a twat.
A not so welcome American import, Mr. Speaker, is that Britain now has more children who are classed as...
Did she just say a not so welcome American import? Oh shit, I know what she's... Oh, that's a terrible... Oh no. Oh no. I know what she's about to say. So... Yeah, no.
obese at the age of 11 than does America.
obesity,
Yesterday's Public Health England
hell.
report showed the dismal failure of the first-year targets on cutting sugar at only 2%. That's compared to 11% drop in the tax on sugary drinks. Will the Prime Minister admit that the voluntary approach is simply not working, it won't work, and that what we want to see in Chapter 2 of the Childhood Obesity Plan is mandatory targets and a ban on junk food discounts?
Yeah, because that's what we need in a society. More authoritarianism. That'll totally fix everything. Just tell them they can't have it. Ban it outright. What we should really do is make, like, nationalised food depots, so people can only get their food from government-approved facilities. If we follow your Shadow Chancellor's plan, they would have to pay a lot of tax and probably get gruel. I've tasted gruel, it's not great. Just saying. She talked about a particular piece of paper about legislation or something. Oh, the Childhood Obesity Act. It's a plan for action. There's an introduction. I've linked it below. It's like it says here: nearly a third of children aged 2 to 15 are overweight or obese, and younger generations are becoming obese at earlier ages and staying obese for longer. Reducing obesity levels will save lives, as obesity doubles the risks of dying prematurely. I love, and I still maintain this is something that makes me chuckle to no end. We go on about childhood obesity, but the moment that child is... don't know why I got tongue-tied. The moment that child is considered an adult, we stop, and we call it body positivity. What a crock of shit. I'm not a fan of the obesity issue. Of course, I'd like it to be resolved. I do not believe you resolve it through introducing authoritarianism. It just creates the black market. You know this. People will do anything to get their hands on what they want. And it does come down to personal choice. I think there needs to be consequences that people need to understand, but then it depends on whether or not the consequences are related to a personal choice that is not a disorder, or whether it is an actual condition. I know many find this quite laughable. I certainly laughed heavily at this, but there is such thing as binge eating disorder. It can be overcome to an extent, of course, but at the same time it's quite tricky. Some of the comments though about the NHS, what it has to spend on obesity related ill health, it from the year 2014 to 2015 spent 5.1 billion on that, which is fucking ridiculous. And to most in the chat, I grew up in the age when numbers were the trendy thing. You know, it's not like us lot got a very good health. Got a very good health from our childhoods, no matter how poor we were. Those numbers were in everything. Oh, they were delicious, weren't they? They point out in this report that obesity rates are highest for children from the most deprived areas. That's not surprising, because people in the most deprived areas have to live not just hand to mouth, but on the very basics, which aren't going to be the most healthy. It's not like people can afford to buy celery for every meal every day without wanting to kill themselves with a sharpened piece of celery, if that's even possible. I'm just going to say now, celery's fucking horrible. One of the two, maybe three vegetables, four vegetables I fucking hate. Okay, try and guess the others if you want, I just don't care. It also concludes that obesity is considered a complex problem with drivers including behaviour, environment, genetics and culture. But the root, at its core, obesity is basically an energy imbalance. Taking in more energy through food than we use through our activity. So in an average day we typically burn about 2,500 calories. We should burn that. So if you're on a diet, you take in less. That's not hard. But at the same time, just because you're taking in less calories doesn't mean you're taking in the right foods. So you ditch sugar, which isn't ideal, I'll admit. I like chocolate. I'm a chocoholic, and I miss chocolate sometimes. But I'm not a fat guy, so I don't care. Some of the suggestions for this also included introducing a soft drink industry levy. So yeah, taxing soft drinks. I don't drink soft drinks, but that's gay. It's not surprising though, because we love to tax drinks. I mean, we tax alcohol at one of the highest duty rates in the whole of Europe. Not even a joke. When we leave the EU, I can guarantee they'll stay that way, because then we get more money in our pocket. The government gets more money. That's what they like. So it'd be inevitable they'd move on to soft drinks eventually. And cough cough, reducing sugar levels. Cough cough, iron brew. Cough cough. Is that subtle enough for you? Let's see. Oh yeah, taking out 20% of sugar in products. I'm going to say this now. Sugar. It depends on the product. If it's certain types of sweets that are made of just sugar, yeah, no, the only way you're going to reduce that by 20% is to take away 20% of the entire mass, and then still claim it weighs the original mass number, because it would be impossible. And then you've got to think also about the quality of the product as well. Overall, like chocolate, with certain sugars, if you reduce that, yeah, that might not work as well. The formula would have to be changed. And I'm sure then companies would find a way around it with some kind of secondary product that could be used as a similar sugar, like a sweetener, but not a sweetener. Maybe. It would take a lot of research. I like research. Oh god, I can hear a cat jumping through the window. If you start meowing, I'm going to murder you. Anyway, no, fuck off. Fuck, oh god. She's going to start meowing. Never mind. Yeah. 1 second. Oh no. No. Bye-bye, Peanut Gallery. Ugh. Right. in through one door, out through the other. Don't kill the cat, don't kill the cat, don't kill the cat. Anyway, a couple of countries have actually tried to introduce this, a junk food tax, and that'd be Mexico and Hungary. The results, though, were kind of, yeah. I need someone with a wrench to time Okie Native out, because we can't be having that kind of chocolate hate speech. That's 7 years in a gulag for you, mate. Just saying. Anyway, let's continue.
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, first of all, I welcome her good wishes for the royal couple. We expressed those here in this house last week, but indeed I think it was a perfect day and a perfect wedding. And Windsor, I think, did the couple proud as well. Now, we know that childhood obesity, the issue she raises, is one of the greatest challenges health challenges that we're facing, and we are determined to tackle it. That's why nowhere in the world is setting more stringent sugar reduction targets than the government has set. We are, as she says, taxing sugary drinks. We're also doing more. It's not just about sugar in food and drinks. It's about helping children to exercise more. It's also about the funding we're putting into researching on.
Actually, that brings up a good point, the exercising thing. I believe schools are trying to introduce a 1 mile a day thing to get kids to be more active on their feet. Maybe make them walk a mile for a day, I think, or something like that. It's not a bad start for kids. For maybe not like the really youngest, because they're just going to be knackered by like 100 yards. They're going to want a nap. Perhaps as a bit older, maybe increase the distance to a mile slowly. For me, I think, it depends on how active you are. It's recommended that you walk 10,000 steps a day. That's recommended for an adult, at least. I think I average about 27,000, which isn't too bad. I mean, that's not bad at all, really. Yeah, so Blue Footy Bobby, yeah. And Dibs, you know you don't rag on tea then, don't you? Do they not have recess? I don't know. We do have breaks, yeah, schools have breaks, but playgrounds vary in different schools. Not all of them have the space for, exercise. Let's continue.
On junk food advertising and cutting, obviously, sugar and calories in food. We have made good progress with the sugar reduction target. Sugar in drinks has been reduced.
I have to again interrupt. This is the difference between being in government and being in opposition. Being in opposition, you want results now, so you'll posture from a position of do it now, it has to be done now, enforce it now. But when you're in government, you realise you can't. You have to be very careful, because you want to be re-elected, but you also want to slowly introduce it, because you know you can't just force something onto the people without them wanting to murder you.
Reduced by 11% and the average calories proportion by 6% in response to the soft drinks industry levy. But absolutely more does need to be done, which is why an updated plan is currently being worked up, and we'll be in a position to share more on that shortly.
Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you. May I associate myself with the Prime Minister's earlier comments? Indeed, this week we have seen the start of the Grenfell inquiry. And last week, Dame Judith Hackett reported that our building regulations were not fit for purpose. Yet she didn't specifically recommend a ban on inflammable cladding. Can the Prime Minister confirm that nevertheless it is her clear intention to ban inflammable cladding? And
Before she gives an answer, I think I pulled up that report, and I've linked it below because it's fucking long. It's like 159 pages long. And the best bit I could find were like clear statements on what system products can and cannot be used or should be developed, and their use made essential. It's so fucking long. Honestly. She did not, though, and I can confirm after reading about, I think I read 120 pages of it before I got bored. It probably would have been sooner, but I was already bored. So I didn't realise my boredom extended past that. She did not specifically ask for a ban on flammable or combustible cladding. Clearly everything needs to be made out of asbestos, I'm just saying. I'm closing that tab now because I can't look at that report anymore.
And ensure that
I'm also
another
going to skip ahead because I want to get to Corbyn. Because he's going to virtue signal for a little bit. And, yeah.
Almost a year since the Grenfell tragedy, and sadly, justice has not yet been done. Many of those families have...
Yeah, Saki, I heard it as well. Inflammable. Yeah. We all heard it. It's quite amusing.
Still not been rehoused, and many are still living in tower blocks where they're worried around the...
Many haven't been rehomed, I agree. But just to be clear, your solution of just taking homes away from people who own them just because they're not using them, even though they are privately owned, is fucked.
Country of the safety of the cladding. More needs to be done more quickly.
Of course. And how will you do that? Authoritarianism.
I agree with what the Prime Minister said about the anniversary of the Manchester bomb. We were there at the service yesterday, and I pay tribute to the people of Manchester for the fantastic event they held last night in Albert Square, which brought all communities across Manchester together. That's the answer to terrorism. That's the answer to threats. Bring people together.
No, it fucking isn't. Oh my god. Okay, maybe it partially is. But if you want to solve terrorism, why don't you talk about the root cause of it? You know, that lovely religion that's so totally not toxic. How about that? How about talking about that? Because it's been mentioned in the House of Lords. When will it be okay to talk about Islam? A Lord mentioned it, and all of them got uncomfortable. And nobody will do it in Parliament because you're all pussies. It's all well and good uniting different communities, but the problem there is they're all different communities. They all have different beliefs, they all hold different values, and some of them are little fucking Trojan horses that want to bomb the shit out of you. It's all well and good standing together being like, oh, you can kill us and murder all our people, but it's okay, we're all singing Kumbaya around the carcasses. But it doesn't change that those same dickheads, the Trojan horses I mentioned, are still going to bomb the shit out of things until you actually address it. You're basically ballless cucks.
Mr. Speaker, in 2010, £4 billion of NHS services were outsourced to private companies. How much is it today?
I can already answer this because I bothered to look it up, and the Prime Minister won't answer this. So I did a load of digging, right? So, where is it? Ah, here we are. This is from, when is it? This is from April this year, right? So, although I think this is wrong, I think it's meant to be billion, but they put an M at the end instead. Out of 21 of the 31 NHS trusts approached by Unison complied with the FOI request, Freedom of Information. But the amount spent by 15 of them is already more than 3.2 million. I think that's meant to be 3.2 billion. There is also a further reference to that's per capita, different article bit. There is reference to how some of it is being spent. Like 600,000 establishing a wholly owned subsidiary for cancer care in Clatterbridge, 400 grand for Gloucestershire Hospitals Foundation Trust, 300 grand for Airedale NHS Trust in Yorkshire, which was spent outsourcing staff, and it does add up. But obviously they didn't get the answers from all the NHS trusts, so they don't have And I know Jonathan Ashworth, the Shadow Health Secretary, has been quoted saying it makes no sense that the NHS trusts are spending so much money transferring their own staff out of the public sector. But this will bring up a very hefty and lengthy discussion and debate on why they had to do it why the government was selling off assets for the NHS, which I think is a misunderstanding for a number of people. Yes, some departments have, but they've conflated departments and land. And we'll get to that later, I promise. You crumpet crunchers have no constitution. We do. It's just in pieces, scattered around the world. What we do, we establish a colony, and we find the firstborn child, and when he's man or woman, we'll let them decide. We then take that fragment of constitution and shove it up their arse. That way, we live forever. That's how it works, right? In any case, it does bring up quite a difficult conversation on privatisation, capita, assets, and the reasoning for outsourcing in the first place. There are issues, and yeah, a lot of them get brought up, so we'll get to those in due course. Hello, Laura. You finished work now, haven't you? Yes. Oh, and the Prime Minister won't answer this question. Just saying.
I first of all say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that I echo his comments. The terrorists who attacked in Manchester, but also, sadly, we saw a number of other terrorist attacks in this country last year. They were trying to divide us. I think the response of all communities, be it here in London or in Manchester, has shown that we will not be divided by the terrorists. We will not let the terrorists win. And
don't be so bloody general about this. We will not be divided by the... I'll say it for you. It's okay. This channel's not getting demonetized for another 50 hours. 450 hours? Yeah. I'll say it for you. I'll get real close to the microphone, okay? Muslim. I hope that helps you understand. Yes, we've had Catholic Christian terrorists in the past, but they sure as fuck aren't doing any of this shit now, are they? In this country. In current year. I know some pedantic shit's gonna be like, oh wow, where's my anorak? It doesn't matter. Let's continue.
We will defeat them. Can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that he asks about...
Thank you for the correction, Godiva.
The outsourcing of services within the National Health Service. Of course, what we do know is that the spend on the independent sector nearly doubled in the last 4 years of a Labour government.
It did, and this is where it gets really interesting because, okay, so we had to outsource work then because of shortages, but we also suffered an economic crash, meaning there was no money realistically to do it, other than the glorified IOU bonds the government will sell to the highest bidder to raise money, that we then have to pay interest on until a certain date when we then pay the full amount. It is quite irritating. And it's quite tricky because the government it does get put into very difficult positions where it has to decide what is essential and how to keep services running. And annoyingly, because yet again another publicly owned system was failing, they had to introduce privatisation to try and stabilise it. Now, of course, over the years, it has failed. But that always happens. It happens with rail, it happens with actually it happens with any service, water even. It failed. And it has in the NHS as well, to an extent. This is where we do need to try and start to stop fucking around with these systems, because I don't consider, even though the NHS is 70 years old, I don't see it as sustainable if people keep fucking with it. You can't have a well-oiled machine if you keep on pulling out cogs and replacing it with blocks. It just doesn't work like that.
Mr. Speaker, my question was about the amount spent now. NHS budgets have increased by just one...
To address Sizofield, this is why privatisation is a positive thing. Sometimes. It does depend, I guess. It is quite... I guess it could be argued that it is quite complex with the NHS especially. The man you're looking at, though, will say, yes, but you only have one mailbox, so you should only have one mail provider. And that's the argumentation. You have one tap. I don't know, maybe he thinks you only have one tap in your house for water. He's that kind of person that thinks you should only have one provider. I think as long as they're well regulated, there's no problem. But because the NHS is majority owned by the people, it gets tricky, and if any private company gets involved, then you get to the point where they themselves not only have to be regulated, but then also subsidised, which I think is fucking stupid.
1% per year under this government, but it's jackpot time for the privateers. Their share is up by 100% to over £9 billion per year. And we learnt that Surrey NHS has just paid Virgin Healthcare 1.5 million, not for any service they delivered, but because their bid wasn't chosen. 1.5 million wasted on Virgin Healthcare that should have been spent on healthcare itself.
Yeah, Surrey needs to shoot itself now. I actually looked it up. It's fucking stupid.
Is the Prime Minister concerned that this week the National Audit Office said NHS England's handling of private contractors had, and I quote, put patients at risk of serious harm?
The right honourable gentleman, that on the National Audit Office report, what they said was no actual harm has been identified.
Right, so I've got that actually, the National Audit Office statement. There's a report conclusion, so I'm going to read that because there's a shit ton from it. NHS England's financial objectives for outsourcing primary care support services were ambitious. However, neither NHS England nor Capita fully understood the complexity and variation of the service being outsourced. As a result, both parties misjudged the scale and nature of the risk in outsourcing these services. The service to primary care practitioners, including Capita's delivery of PCSE, has fallen a long way below an acceptable standard. This had an impact on the delivery of primary care services and had the potential to seriously harm patients, although no actual harm to patients has been identified. NHS England was unable to stop Capita's aggressive office closure programme without cancelling the contract, even though it was having a harmful impact on service delivery. While some services have now improved, it is deeply unsatisfactory that 2.5 years into the contract, NHS England and Capita have not yet reached the level of partnership working required to make a contract like this work effectively. Although NHS England has saved significant sums of money, value for money is not just about cost reduction. NHS England will need to address the current service failures over the remaining life of the contract if it is to achieve both the savings and service improvements it intended. So essentially, Capita is falling short at the moment. Congratulations. You're just making Jeremy Corbyn look good. Anyway, let us continue with this.
It is also the case that in relation to the particular contracts they were talking about, the savings that have been made have all been reinvested in frontline NHS patient care and has helped to fund the equivalent of an extra 30,000 operations. But he talks about
Before she makes this snide little comment, I like that people, I don't know why people don't seem to understand this, that if more people are using the services, that puts more of a strain on it. So why are you bragging about there being more people using the service when we don't have the staff to, do the service? It's a silly thing, but May seems to like to proudly declare that more operations are taking place. But if anything, that should be used as a proving point that more needs to be done to alleviate that strain. However, certain mitigating factors are going to get brought up later, so I'll hold off on that for now. So I'll let her say her snide little remark and then we'll continue.
A percentage of money that has been spent on the private sector. I have to say, last year the proportion of spend in the NHS in England outsourced to private sector did not go up at all. There was somewhere where it went up 0.
I just want to say now to Laura, I don't know why they fixed your bag. There's a man in my server who needs to have his stuff fixed, but they fixed a whammon first? That's mad.
8%. Oh yes, Wales.
Okay, the joke here is that NHS Wales is Labour run. I did a little digging on this as well. There's Welsh Government programme budgets in the description. That's obviously there for you if you're interested. But there's a Channel 4 thing which covered like who decides how much money Wales gets to spend, which is it's basically up to Westminster, but they do take the time. It's assumed though, because the Barnett people assume the Barnett formula isn't perfect, and people have said that it reflects purely population size. There's no reflection on demographic features, which is one of the arguments made against how the NHS is funded in different countries of the United Kingdom. So, for example, health spending per person, the Barnett formula recommends that 2,100 spent in England, the same amount in Wales per person. This is 2,200 in Scotland because they got cholesterol, and also 2,100 in Northern Ireland. Most of them get just under that. It is actually quite interesting that NHS England's formula and Scotland's both actually give Wales 2,300, which is an increase in spending by £181. So they're actually required. They do. Okay, it could be argued as a deficit, but it depends on which formula you're abiding and who is spending the money, because they don't have a great record at the moment. £14 an hour. Laura, if you want to earn that an hour, you should do what I do. I clean, I make about £15 an hour, and I work whenever I can be bothered. It sounds sad, but especially when I went to university, but at this point in my life I just don't care anymore. Just give me money. That's my view on work. What was it? The Lords have since reported that Wales in particular loses out in the absence of a needs-based funding system. And I think that has a proportionate... That's in regards to proportionality for people over the age of 65. I think it has more proportionately to the rest of the UK. Proportionately, which doesn't mean obviously the total number. It's more of a based on popular... it's just some stupid shit. It's a subjective argument, basically. This is interpreting it based on a different country, although no one took into account Northern Ireland. Clearly no one gives a shit about them. Anyway, let us close these two tabs and continue. I think Corbin fucks up in a minute. He's going to fuck up pronouncing a word, and it's going to really annoy me.
Mr. Speaker, the National Audit Office criticised NHS England's Capita contract, saying, and I quote, it had put patients at risk of serious harm.
But it couldn't prove it. It couldn't prove there was any definitive proof of harm. So there was risk, yes, but no proof of any actual harm. You've got to be very careful here.
Thousands of women dropped from the National Cervical Cancer Screening Programmes.
Laura, would you go so far as to say flogging my pods off? Would you do that for Tide Pods? Just saying. Insert shitty dad joke here, I guess.
Another element of the contract handed over to Capita was for GP services.
Before we continue, since Laura's talking about tenors, in the chat, see if you can work out what a pony is.
Which resulted in 2/3 of GP practices receiving incorrect medical records. 500,000 new patient letters left unsent.
Oh, shit.
Isn't this the...
I think I missed what he said. There was a bit he fucked up. I need to hear it.
Cancer screening
Right, here it is.
Right. And I quote...
In a minute, he's going to say something, and it's going to be mispronounced, and I hope you all notice.
It had put patients at risk of serious harm.
I promise you, he'll mispronounce it. It's very funny.
Thousands of women dropped from the National Cervical...
Cervical. I know that's a small thing, but to me, this bell end getting it so badly wrong makes me chuckle. It's cervical, dickhead.
Cancer screening programs. Another element of the contract handed over to Capita was for GP services, which resulted in 2/3 of GP practices receiving incorrect medical records. 500,000 new patient letters left unsent. Isn't this the inevitable consequence of this government tearing up the founding principles of the NHS and putting...
This is cheap. I'll agree the Conservatives never used to support the NHS, but this is where conflation of what is being sold off gets to me. Certain services were privatised, yes, because we could not afford to run the services. They had to be sold so privatisation could run the services. But where conflation occurs is when he assumes and injects things like sites, hospitals that will then be knocked down and replaced by housing. We have raised, I think I have the article for this. Okay, the cervical cancer thing we'll get to in a minute. We're selling around about £2 billion worth of surplus land owned by the health service to build 26,000 homes. So basically, this is land that isn't being used. It either is, it isn't used, or it has been used, or is being used by a soon-to-be derelict hospital because they're no longer fit for purpose. Most things aren't these days. To be fair, everything is in crisis after all. In any case, there was also a reference. There's also a thing about a privatisation deal. Right, so I had to go digging because I wasn't too sure. Basically, the Conservative Party signed a privatisation deal in 2015 worth £780 million. A total of 11 private firms are intended to help hospitals tackle the backlog of patients waiting for surgery and tests. I think, what was it? I think even one of the firms kind of got fucked up because they ballsed up an eye operation in 2014. I think the company was called Vanguard. They screwed it up. Yeah, context basically. Yeah, you're quite right, Zophiel. So yeah, there's that. The cervical cancer screening thing was a huge mistake, an error in like a freaking computer system. Does the NHS still run off Windows 95 or something still? I'm not blaming 95. I'm more blaming the NHS for still using an antiquated system. Hell, I bet they still run off like 1 gigabyte of DDR1. If DDR1 actually had a gigabyte. I don't know. It's a long time ago. But it was an embarrassment thing. It was reported on BBC News that more than 2,000 women in the UK, half of whom were either delayed or didn't attend screening because of a fuck up. But then again, this has affected countless more because of this, this system fuck up. So yeah, I'm done with that. Let's close that tab as well. If you're interested in reading up about that, though, that is also in the description. It is quite interesting, I guess. Yeah. It's always nice to see when the NHS screws up. Yeah, you're probably right, Saki. Probably right.
And putting private profit before public service.
Subjective, and this is where it gets really annoying. It's how you interpret how the services are being conducted. Yes, okay, privatisation at this moment in time is getting quite a bad rap, I'll agree. Constant bailouts for national rails, it's just fucking embarrassing. And of course, the added demand being applied to the NHS, the requirements for additional GPs, a lot of whom are retiring younger. And it'll get mentioned, the GP part will get mentioned later. I did some digging. Like, GPs, quite a lot of them, earn about £100,000 a year before tax. So here we go. Family doctor's income has fallen. since 2005 to 26, with the average full-time doctor earning £101,500 before tax in 2014 to 2015, which is considered a 10% drop in cash terms, but in reality it's not. Fuck off. But after taxes in our country, that would be £60,000. That is a monster payday. I mean, doctors, GPs, it must be quite dull sticking your finger up bottoms, but at the same time, do that for 30 years? Honestly, you're laughing. You retire young, well, somewhat young, have a decent pension, and then you can stop giving a shit. But then this comes down to, should it then be mandated that GPs stay on for longer? Because then that depends on the general practice itself and the trusts. Do they enforce mandatory retirement ages at an increased number, increased age, or not? It really does get tricky, and we'll get to this later. It's quite, oh dear, it's quite irritating, and I really want to get through this with some expedience, I guess, because I really want to get to my favourite part of this, which is John McDonnell, and everyone knows what's happening. It's going to be great. I could get paid for my kink. Well, I was talking to Tiger Lily about kinks earlier, because, yeah, a lot of other people have kinks with regards to tentacles, and we were talking about that. It was quite funny. I'm not putting on blast. It amuses me nonetheless. Where were we? Yes.
Can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, at every general election since the NHS was formed, the Labour Party has scaremongered about the Conservative approach to the NHS.
Okay, I do want to now point out why. Because it will get mentioned. You'll hear it from someone chuntering later. It was because the Conservatives did not support the NHS's creation. However, I have to now say that while we shouldn't blame the past, we should understand that parties change. And they do. Some become considerably more moderate over time, and others deviate so far to the left that they think it's okay to call the bald brown man a coconut. Amazing. Coconuts.
They have made, at every general election, they've made claims about privatisation, they've made claims about funding cuts.
It is true that there has been some privatisation elements, but the fear that they're selling off the NHS, it's such a fine thread. There are elements of the NHS that have been privatised, and one day, yes, we should buy them back when we can afford to, but also afford to invest in it. Until then, we can't. We cannot be so reckless as to simply sell off a load of bonds to buy them back, knowing that you're not going to make money from the NHS. That's not how the NHS works. So essentially, you can't regard it as an investment, as smart as you want to be about this. And I support the NHS, of course I do. Because, I've got to keep my whammins, my sandwich wenches all healthy and stuff. But still, I understand the very basic premise that if we have not got the resources to look after a service, but we need that service, then we should, of course, hire people from an outside source if needed to take on that additional pressure. Now, of course, how those contracts are negotiated and how much oversight is involved is not on me. Oh, and actually, that just reminds me about the Grenfell thing earlier. A lot of complaints that come from this is that the government should be more involved in how these are built. That whole argument of oversight, and it's quite silly, really, because those were built. They were done under contract. It wasn't down to the government then to have a representative there while they were building them to make sure they weren't using an illegal compound, which is what they were doing. Because they were cheapening shit, because they're dickheads. Anyway.
And what has every elected Conservative government done? We have protected the NHS. We have protected the NHS, we have improved the NHS services, we have put more funding into the NHS, and we have ensured that we remain true to the founding principle of the NHS, that it is free at the point of delivery.
Which it is. That actually, even though elements are privatised, that's subsidised through the contract that the government has with that outsourced company. With that company, that money is then taken from national insurance, I believe. I could be wrong on that though. What was it you wrote? Where is it? Where's it going? NHS is a black hole for money. It is, if you want to regard it as something to invest in. I do think it's a model that can be made better, can be improved, but annoyingly, whenever a new government comes in, they say this. And then they'll bring out paper and legislations and bills, and it just messes everything up even worse. I don't understand how it's so vastly complex, but that's obvious. But I do wish that they could just stop tinkering with the fine detail and just focus on the overall, because obviously it's failing on a bigger scale. Just focus on the bigger problem.
From the party that opposed the NHS in the first place, that is a bit rich.
Cheap shot doesn't mean anything now. It's utter dick, and you're going to hear people. The Shadow Health Secretary, I think, next to the oh, you can't see her on the screen, but on to the left is an irritating lady. To her left is the Shadow Health Secretary. He is going to be. You're going to hear some common little shit talking. A weasel, essentially. You'll hear him, don't worry. You'll understand.
You voted against it 22 times.
Order.
You voted against it 22 times.
Fag.
Far too much noise on both sides of the House. I've got plenty of time, and I'm sure the principals have as well, and we will get through the questions, but preferably in an atmosphere of calm. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Royal College of GPs says, and I quote, "The long list of failures made by Capita have been incredibly frustrating for GPs and our teams. We are still dealing with the fallout. It's public servants bearing the brunt of private failure." Mr. Speaker, GPs are leaving the profession in despair. 4,000 have retired early in the past 5 years. That's 1 in 10.
Just to counter that though, that is a bit disingenuous what he's doing. Because while that many are leaving, over 6,000 are joining. So we're covering the loss with an increase, but there are GPs leaving. That is true. A number, though, are quite a large number, in fact, because they're deciding to retire early. Because either they can't be bothered to handle the pressure of the workload, and it has been estimated we need an additional 12,000 GPs. I know that. I know that the government's plan is 5,000. Whether that will truly stem this tide, I don't know, but it is quite a difficult position to be in, because we're going to have to import doctors, and that then brings up the immigration issue again, which I'm not against. Skilled workers I'm okay with, as long as you integrate properly, of course, and you abide the NHS's set rules on medical practice. There have been a number of doctors that have come from other countries that have violated people in this country. So yeah, abide our rules on that. Anyway.
In 2015, the Health Secretary said he would hire another 5,000 GPs.
Yeah, where are they?
How many more GPs are there than there were in 2015?
I've already said how many there are. Just going to say that. I think the total number of GPs, and I don't have the tab open. The total number of GPs is over 42,000 in England. I think it's just over 42,000, with an estimated requirement of 12,000, up to 12,000. to deal with the number of patients that require a doctor. Now think about this as a form of a cost. You need 12,000 doctors, with the average one earning 100 grand a year. Yes, okay, you're taking away 40 grand in tax, but at the same time, shit, that's expensive. Let's continue.
Well, Jeremy, well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, we now have over 14,900 more doctors in our NHS than in 2010. And we are indeed committed.
I think that's not as impressive as it sounds when you think about population increase and then additional pressure on services. Coupled that with budget cuts that were introduced then as well. We know why they had to be introduced, of course, we all know why. But at the same time, it's not impressive to brag about in hindsight.
To delivering 5,000 more GPs, and we've increased the number of training for GPs. But can I also say to the right honourable gentleman, he talks about this issue of the private sector being used in the National Health Service. Well, he might actually ask the Shadow Health Secretary what his view is on this, because the Shadow Health Secretary has said we're still going to buy from the private sector where we haven't got capacity in the NHS.
That was a comment from a Sky interview. I have found it and I had a video of it, but I can't play it because Sky are dickheads and they'll copyright claim the stream even though I'm not monetized. And I don't really want a copyright claim or a strike on this channel.
If Shadow Health Secretary is committed to it.
That's always happened. Mr. Speaker.
I don't know if anyone heard that. I don't know if anyone heard it, but the Shadow Health Secretary said that's always happened. Yes, it has. But your party wants to renationalise everything. So that's not an argument. And just an FYI, I did not hear that the first time I was going through this to find sources. So I think it's a very interesting little comment from the smug common shithead.
Shadow Health Secretary has a very good understanding of the needs of patients and will always put them first. And he will not be the one who's putting the private sector first. Mr. Speaker, the reality is there are 1,000 fewer GPs and the number is...
That's not true. Just saying. Yes, down. Numbers are down. But no, they're not. I've already said why.
It's falling. No wonder that more and more people are writing to me every week saying how difficult it is to get a GP appointment. GPs are the bedrock of the NHS. We need more of them.
Well, maybe we should stop getting them. Maybe we should, not allow them to retire. Then we wouldn't have so many leaving. They could stay longer. Maybe have it so they stay until the day they die. I mean, that seems fair. I'm okay with this because they're public servants after all, right? If you can't tell I'm being sarcastic, just honestly. What's this here? Let's focus on one issue. Immigration is another. Yeah, use of service and immigration. Yeah, it's vastly more complex than simply those two subjects. I'm going to ignore the rest of that.
Mr. Speaker, I had a letter this week from Anne. Yes, Anne, she is somebody who is retired and until recently had been caring for her mother at home. And she wrote, the NHS pay a private nursing home for mum's care. Day after day we experience a catalogue of disasters. I can't leave my mum knowing that her needs aren't catered for. So I spend hours at the nursing home.
I'd have to know more about the circumstances because this is very general. Just saying.
What action is the government taking to deal with the substandard care providers give in the private care sector, which is so upsetting for so many people?
Privately owned private care is regulated quite heavily. If they're in breach of that, then they could either lose the contract or be sued into the ground. There are your two options. If the care is not adequate, then you either take them away and place them in a different care facility and then sue the fuck out of the other one, or you just talk to you can't talk to whoever it is that's supposed to be dealing with that shit and have them tear the contract up. Maybe we need people to take more responsibility for their health. That accountability is a key element that I think is often overlooked. I think if you knowingly, it gets quite tricky, and I say, I know I've spoken to a number of people who I've talked extensively about that really fat bitch I made a video on, and it gets quite tricky when you finally start to understand the mentality of some types of people with conditions they have or have developed because of their choices. Now, while their choices were reckless, it reminds me of the argument about how to deal with drug addicts. Do you treat them as patients or criminals? Logically, you treat them as patients, but a number of people would argue criminals because they've committed a criminal act, and therefore the consequence is theirs to bear, and they should pay for it, whether it be monetarily for the treatment or prison, and go cold turkey and suffer for it. Others would argue treat them as a patient. I don't know if this is making much sense, I guess. I know what I'm trying to say, I just might not be going about it the right way. We'll see. I'm sure someone in the chat understands me. At least one person. If not, then clearly I'm not woke enough.
Yeah. The right honourable gentleman. And to Anne, that I fully understand that people want to ensure and want to have the confidence and the reassurance of knowing that the care that their loved ones is receiving is of a good quality. That is why...
Thank you, Stargazer.
It is this government, that is why it is this government that's put into place the various steps to ensure that we are looking into the quality of care that is provided in those sectors. But he talks about the Shadow Health Secretary recognising the needs of patients. I think he was saying he recognised the needs of patients, and that's why the private sector would be used in some cases. But can I just...
That is exactly what it meant. And this gormless little shit, pulling this face like, what? But your quote literally translated to that. Oh, you're such a twat. Jonathan, I hope you hear this. You're a fucking idiot.
Also say to him that the former health minister, now the mayor for Manchester, said the private sector puts its capacity into the NHS for the benefit of NHS patients, which I think most people in this country would celebrate.
Jeremy Corbyn!
The Shadow Health Secretary is dedicated to the NHS, not to handing it over to private contractors.
Just because they handed over to private contractors does not mean they're providing a subpar service. It means they're being handed over to someone else. Yes, we need to do more to deal with the fact that they are not providing the service that they're being paid for. That is on us, well, you, to then deal with them. And if they're not going to be up to task, then make sure that someone more suitable takes over the contract and provides the service that a lot of money is being paid for. Do you understand that, Corbyn? You don't just blame privatisation, you acknowledge it, and then you deal with it. You flex your muscles because you are... Well, not you. Fuck. Yeah. I think people know what I mean. You flex your muscles and you tell them who's boss. Essentially, who's the daddy. Then again, just imagine, right? Picture this. You picture Jeremy Corbyn or Theresa May staring down at their private companies and him simply getting up close and going, who's the daddy? Or who's your daddy? I fucked that up. Never mind, it doesn't matter. But it would be hilarious to hear Corbyn say it or to hear Theresa May say it. I think it'd be funnier to hear Corbyn say it, though. Who's your daddy? That'd be quite funny.
That's the difference. Mr. Speaker, the Care Quality Commission said last year there is too much poor care. A fifth of care providers require improvement. Year after year, private sector care providers are letting down our elderly. This year, Mr. Speaker, is the 70th birthday of the National Health Service. I pay tribute to all its staff over all of those 70 years. But the NHS reaches this milestone with the worst A&E waits on record, the worst delays for cancer referrals on record, falling numbers of GPs.
This is disingenuous because when records go back. Just saying.
Falling numbers of nurses, and the longest funding squeeze in its history. While this government opens the door.
Also, another thing about falling numbers in nurses, we still have more nurses. Yes, the falling number's bad, but we're trying to work around how we get more skilled workers here. I don't like these. Is his final question? I hate it when people do. When he does this, he starts summing up this over dramatic shit. By the way, I was going to look at Twitter before this and look at the PMQ hashtag, but then I realised after the last couple of weeks of doing it that it's just full of Labour supporters bleating on about how May lost. And then I looked closer at it, and yeah, she probably did take an L in a couple of them. But it was so disingenuous how they went about saying it. It was so meh. I can't be bothered. Just can't be bothered.
To even more profiteering. Why doesn't the Prime Minister act now? Act now to end the siphoning off of billions of pounds from patient care and give it to the NHS the funding that it needs.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, we do indeed pay tribute to all those who have worked in the National Health Service over its 70 years and who work there today. And we want to see a bright future for the NHS, which is why we will be coming forward with a long-term plan for the National Health Service. And what we see today is a National Health Service with more funding going into it, but crucially with more people being treated, more operations being undertaken. There are people alive today who have suffered from cancer who would not have been alive just 8 years ago because our cancer outcomes have improved. That's the reality of our National Health Service. But what we also see is that this government can only put money into the National...
By the way, I have to let this go as long as it does because I'm waiting. She's about to talk about the balanced economy thing. There is some validity to it. People had to suffer because of massive mistakes made. And it's the lack of acknowledgement of those mistakes that were made by the ultra-left Labour Party in its current form is astonishing. Anyway, in a minute she's going to get to the bit that I have been waiting for. I just love this. It's delicious. It's going to be great.
Health Service because we have a balanced approach to our economy. What did we learn this week? That the Labour Party and the Shadow Chancellor...
Oh, this is the best bit. Everyone, this is so good. I've got a video for it. Just wait.
...want to do. They want to overthrow capitalism.
Oh, it's so good. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go straight here. We're going to go here to this little video here. Oh, yes. Let's just turn that volume up. Oh, yes.
Now, you used to put in your Who's Who entry that your hobby was fomenting the overthrow of capitalism.
And everyone thinks I misspelt that. It wasn't. It was a joke on brewing, but never mind.
Is it now your job, the overthrow of capitalism, rather than your hobby?
Yes, it is. It's transforming our economy. Because I think we've got at the moment...
There's a difference between transforming the economy and overthrowing capitalism.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is, because I think at the end of the day I want a socialist society. And that means transforming in a way which radically challenges the system as it now is, and I think that's what we're doing. And what's interesting...
He's a socialist and a Marxist. Okay. I'm going to let him finish this like a minute more.
We're taking people with us because people see that there has to be that transformation. We cannot allow another crisis to occur that occurred in 2007, 2000, where we all have to pay for that. We can't allow...
What caused that crisis, dickhead? Think about it long and hard. Right? Most people would agree the crisis was caused by a certain regulation issue. I think most can agree that that played a key part. It was not helped by dickheads thinking, I know how we fix this. We print off more money when it doesn't exist.
You know, I can get quite emotional about this. Look, only a few months ago we had someone die, a homeless person die within feet of a door of Parliament I don't want to live in a society like that, and I don't think the British people do either.
You've been
I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I want everyone to die, though. Hashtag No Lives Matter, everyone. 2020. Support me. Support me and Magog as we rule this fucking world.
a great supporter of the economic experiment in Venezuela, and it's in the news because of the
LOL
elections this week. That's now a country that's plagued by hyperinflation, chronic shortages of food, medicine, poverty. You know this. That's an example of a failed socialist economic
It went wrong.
model.
No, I don't think it was a socialist country. I think.
Oh, of course it fucking... oh. Oh, of course it was. Oh, of course not. Why would it be when it was declared even by Corbyn as an amazing sort of socialist society? You bellend.
I think what happened was Chavez were developing policies which I think would, first of all, tackle the tragedy of the poverty that was in that country, raising literacy rates and then investing in the economy, using their oil wealth to do that. I think it took a wrong turn when Chavez went, and I think, unfortunately, since then, I don't think they've been following the socialist policies that Chavez was doing.
I'm going to ignore this because I just noticed on the side something really funny. Okay, because McDonnell is a special kind of tosser. Okay, he once, in Parliament, offered a book to the former Chancellor, George Osborne. So I'm just going to go to that video now because this is brilliant. Oh, fuck off.
I just created...
Fuck off with adverts. I'm going to mute that while it plays. Here we go. Right. Okay.
To assist Comrade Osborne in his dealings with his newfound comrades, I brought him along Mao's little red book. Let me quote.
Seriously. He gives this to him as well.
Let me quote, Mr. Speaker.
Order! I want to hear about the contents of the book.
I think you'll find this invaluable. Well, let me offer.
Rather an excitable one.
I thought this would help him, Mr. Speaker. Let's quote from Mao.
I love this reaction. It's priceless.
Rarely done in this chamber. The quote is this. Behave. We must learn to do economic work from all who know how, no matter who they are. We must esteem them as teachers, learning from them respectfully and conscientiously. But we must not to pretend to know what we do not know. I thought it would come in handy for him in his new relationship.
This is the best bit of it. Okay, I don't actually think quote's too bad in hindsight, but it's obviously because it's come from a person who killed like 60 million fucking people. Was it 60? I can't remember the exact number. But this reaction is like one of my favourite bits.
So the Shadow Chancellor literally stood at the dispatch box and read out from Mao's little red book. And look, it's his personal signed copy.
George Osborne's a twat. We can all agree. He's a fucking idiot. Of course he is. But still. Oh my god. Where's it? I've got to find something quickly. I'll see if I can find it. I'll quickly find this before we finish. Here we go. Right.
How do we change the system? We've got to demand systemic change. I'm honest with people. I'm a Marxist. You know, this is a classic.
There you go. That's all you need, really. Fuck it. Amazing. Let's finish this. Okay. So since I am done, is there anything anyone would like to ask before I end this stream? It doesn't have to be politics related, I guess. 45 million. Jesus, I was off a bit. But still, that's a ridiculous number. Thank you for checking that for me, Dally. I would, by the way, cover the Scottish National Party questions, but quite frankly, they were boring, like more boring than the questions Corbyn put forward. Overall, I think that it was actually not so bad as far as I was. It was childish in parts, but I don't know. It was a lot more information to it, and I quite enjoy that. And as far as SNP go, they only really think of a very narrow spectrum of things, so I don't really care about them. And this week I've overrun a bit as well. I don't really want to be talking about the SNP for another 20 minutes or 5 even. Not this week anyway. There's no definitive figure, right? Well, don't wait till 2020. Just kill me now. Right. Okay, on that note, then I'm just ending the stream. Thank you all very much for joining me, and have a lovely evening, I guess.